So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is the redone version of Thranduil's Halls, the old version of which was a very popular map for people to play on, and this is the updated version, certainly with a more interesting feel to it, albeit probably a little bit harder to defend actually, considering there is an outside section which is a little bit more open. It doesn't have the same choke pointy effect that the initial defence of the last version of Thranduil's Halls had, but I would say as well that there is more opportunity for getting good firing lines if you are the defenders, so there's a little bit of risk reward going on. There's also more ways into the halls themselves. As you can see, this is a very long one. Originally this was going to be a Carandros replay, but I could not get that one to load. It would crash on startup every single time I tried it. So that was another sort of big redone set piece map that I was hoping to show today, but unfortunately that one is probably not going to see the light of day, because even if I turn the graphics way down it doesn't seem to work. I'll see what can be done, but shortly after that one was sent to me anyway, this one was sent, so a very similar feel, because it's obviously there's a lot of work that went into these redone maps. Now the thing is, this isn't really a themed one as such, albeit there is a potential theme we can explore. There is actually no presence of Mirkwood today. The Elven King's throne sits empty, and instead it is the Arnorians and the Dwarves that are taking up excuse me, the defence of Thranduil's Halls. So I guess Thranduil has either left Middle-earth or has been overcome already by the threat that is now on his doorstep, or his former doorstep anyway. And I guess the theme that we're running with is there are three evil factions on the attack, as well as, no, not these guys, I think it's over here. Lothlorien are on the attack with three evil factions, so I guess the only possible theme that we can actually extrapolate from this is what would happen if Galadriel accepted the ring, I guess. So, yeah, interesting that Lothlorien are on the side of darkness today and attacking an elven settlement no less, but it's a tenuous theme at best, of course, but it's the best that we can do with the situation, and there is at least the hypothetical situation where that happened. So, we'll start off with the attacking armies, and considering they're the de facto leaders in this fictional scenario that we have just invented, we're going to go through Lorien first and foremost, commanded by Atomic Bear 89. Lorien, of course, as with pretty much all the elves, Imladris are maybe a little bit more well suited to it, but the elves do tend to struggle a bit on the attack if they're not taking a considered approach because of their less numerous nature, and indeed some of their entry-level units are not the most tanky in terms of their armour scores. So the Lorien archers, they can of course do a lot of damage to the enemy if they get them into a good position, but they do need to be careful. They're not the best when it comes to skirmishing back and forth because of their lower numbers and lower armour. They're going to be pushing up the ram, interestingly enough. Now, one area where Lorien do excel, especially considering they're fighting alongside the forces of evil today, is going to be the damage and high quality that they're capable of bringing. The Galadriel warriors, something that the other elves don't really have, is a dedicated heavy axe unit, and this will allow them to do that good armour piercing damage, and all three of the defending factions today are going to be at least fully reliant really on their armour, especially against a force like Lothlorien with their qualities, so the armour piercing is going to be very, very helpful, you would suggest. We've got the Lorien Bladesmen as well. I mean, in terms of pure melee, they will do quite nicely against the forces of Cardolan and Arthedain, the entry-level units at least. I mean, the dwarves will be able to fight relatively evenly with them, and there is, of course, again, that lightweight nature, which may prove to be a problem, but as long as they sort of intermingle with their allies today, I think they should be okay. Cairn Amroth Rangers, Elven Rangers, of course, have got even more damage than the already extremely damaging human Rangers. So again, if they get into the right position, they could be truly devastating, but Thranduil's Halls, as we mentioned, for the defenders, there's plenty of good positions they can take up for their own skirmishers, and the Cairn Amroth Rangers, like any ranger really, with some very few exceptions, are going to be quite vulnerable to counterfire, so again, it'll be a little bit more difficult to use them, but if they can be used, they'll be very effective. More Lorien archers, more Cairn Amroth Rangers, so double dipping on them, and there's also the Galadriel nobles, who will be a little bit more resilient all round, because of course they are the most well-rounded of the Lorien units really. The Silverthorn arrows, more useful for interrupting an enemy's advance, but they can also, when they're in a skirmish fight, knock enemy units over, so they can dominate in that regard, but again, the terrain of the map is going to make that a little bit more challenging than it would normally be, perhaps, for the elves and what they're used to. Galadriel Axemen, throwing axemen, combined with being the bulkier, higher-end unit of Lothlorien line infantry, so again, they can use those projectiles, and it'll be a little bit more easy to use throwing projectiles because they're going to need to get stuck in And yeah, throwing axes are going to be a good tool for getting rid of, in particular, the phalanx units, which maybe the Arnorians will be likely to bring. Galathrim archers more well suited for that skirmishing, albeit still with a lower unit count, but they can also do very well for themselves in melee. Guardians of Karas Galadhon, no one's going to have a superior pike unit to this on the field today. And if it comes down to it in the late game, especially in the more narrow sections of the sort of upper plinths of Thranduil's halls, these guys could be really, really domineering. And then of course you've got the Kindred of Celeborn, one of two bodyguard throwing axe units in the game. A very, very strong unit at dealing damage, both at range, especially at range, but also in melee with their dual-wielded blades. Now then, over here we have the Haradrim, played by Lyn of the Pan Cloud. So he is going to be marching with Lorien on this side of things, and you could scarcely get a more different faction, really. The one similarity they have, I suppose, is the fact they are both pretty savage in melee with their damage, but Harad, of course, certainly not as skillful, but far more numerous. The Southron Warband, again, a little bit of armor piercing. These factions that do have access to an entry-level spear unit that does have that bit of armor piercing just gives them that little bit more efficiency in melee against the kind of armies that we're going to be seeing on the defense today. So that's something, but obviously in terms of their quality, they're still going to struggle mightily because low armor, low defensive skill, and all of that. The Dismounted Serpent Guard, however, are a pretty good option, especially with the armor upgrade here. It makes up for, or partially makes up for, the main weakness that these guys have when you compare them to a lot of other basic human line infantry. But in melee terms, they do fight relatively evenly, or even actually in a superior manner to some of the forces we may see on the defense today. But again, for line infantry, that survivability is the main factor. So they do still, even with the armor upgrade, potentially fall down there, especially with the slightly lower shield value. Defending skirmishers could still be an issue in great quantities, and I'm sure that's going to be the linchpin of the defense today. Haradrim Spearmen, so basic units, of course, trying to flood forwards again. Numbers will be key, for especially backing up the elves. Unupgraded Serpent Guard here, so you get the direct comparison between the upgraded and unupgraded variants. Is this 2 units of Demons of the Desert? May very well be, based on the layouts. I mean, they can be incredibly devastating, but also pretty vulnerable. And again, it's a situation where if the defending skirmishers are in the right position, they should absolutely be dealing with them quickly. Trollmen, though, are going to be certainly a very scary unit for the defenders to have to deal with. Beast Hunters and more Southron Warbands, so again more javelins, but of the basic variety. Interesting, no Champions of Neferat, double dipping on the demons instead, which is... oh wait, hang on. No, Champions of Neferat are over here. All the way off on their own. But yeah, I was going to say, it would be a very strange decision not to bring them, considering the defending armies today. Meanwhile, as we clip underneath the map, we'll go over to this side too. Always a scary foe to fight for defenders, and Jacket is going to be commanding the Witch Realm of Angmar. Interesting to see the general in a Trolls unit, considering the aggressive nature with which Trolls are used, but still, that does mean the general is going to be particularly strong as an individual unit entity, I suppose. Trolls of Angmar, we got the upgraded and unupgraded versions here, so again, double dipping on the Trolls. We know how effective they can be, and especially for forcing your way through and doing a lot of damage to a well-prepared defence. The Trolls will eventually fall, of course, but the damage they can do is kind of unavoidable, and that can be an issue for defenders. I mean, it's a 3v4 rather than a 3v5, but that's still the kind of kill count that will be difficult to reconcile with. For defenders, we've got Witch Realm Pikemen, again, another good choice for anchoring yourself in place. Some tropical trees in the background, which is interesting. We've got Guardians of Khan Doom, unupgraded, but again, probably one of the most well-rounded units of line infantry in the game, for the cost anyway. Like, a little bit lower cost, obviously they're not going to be quite as good as something like the line infantry they get from the Dwarves or the Elves, but very numerous, stats are very good, big shield, armour as well, which can be upgraded. Not really too much to hate about the Guardians of Khan Doom, and in this situation those shields are going to be very important. Angmar Marauders for the numbers, of course. I mean, the difference in quality of the shields with like wooden planks that have been hastily lashed together. But the numbers, as we've already said, could be key considering the kind of force that they're going to be marching into. That's a lot of Angmar Marauders as well, which is pretty neat to see. We've got Orc Fellas with the armour piercing, and of course the Barrow-wights, which are always going to be brought really for Angmar because of their survivability. No getting rid of them quickly. And finally we have Arbiter, who is playing as Rhun. We've got Loknar Rim. Of course, now is the moment when someone decides to start beeping me on Discord, but there's nothing to be done about that now. I really should go invisible when I start doing this, but I always forget. Nar-Rim, so the flaming projectiles again could be useful. I mean, they make for a very striking effect on the on the buildings in particular, and obviously the wooden round burning is a fairly evocative image. We've got the Gamprim as well, so they don't have access to pikes, but again, armour-piercing halberds, decent quality from the Gamprim as well. Scion Rim for that, again, defensive unit that Rhun otherwise would lack. The most expensive of the Loki units is the only one to not have armour-piercing, interestingly enough, but far and away defensively the strongest. And then you've got the Flag Rim as well. We've already mentioned the potential benefits of all of the armour-piercing, and of course Rhun certainly don't lack for that. Plenty of them as well, which is good to see. We've got E-Strong crossbows. Sooner or later this person is going to get tired of beeping me. We've got the E-Strong crossbows as well, so you've got the damage that they can kick out. And then we've got the Dragon Knights. Camel's Dragon Knights. I mean, interesting to see no other fast movers that we can see from the attackers. It could be that the Elven ones are hidden in the trees. But we've seen the virtues, really, of cavalry from the attackers and defenders in Siege of late. But again, in Thranduil's halls itself, it's even more difficult to use cavalry in the interior of that because of the narrow nature of it than it would normally be, and also there's some gradients as well. So we'll see how they get on, but for the defenders, they do have a force which is defending the outer section. Interesting to see the gatekeepers right on the front line. I mean, Cardolan, of course, their crossbows could be absolutely devastating. Ered Luin have got their own specialty projectiles as well, and Arnor, or Arthedain I should say, have got a very good core of archers, so good selection of ranged units here, which is going to be the backbone really of the defence. But the gatekeepers are right on the front line. Little Akari is playing as Cardolan. We've got some Greenway footmen without the armour upgrade, but basic pikes, like we've said before, they can be really, really handy in these kind of siege battles just to really block up the way. And then the Arthedain pikemen, Lucky Luke playing as Arthedain, so the equivalent from them. They've got the armour upgrade though, and just in general they're a little bit higher quality than the Cardolan one, but again, less numerous. But I would imagine both of them bringing their full complement here. Dunedain Rangers right on the front. I'd imagine that they're going to shimmy away pretty fast, if only because you don't want to be losing Rangers to the Elves early doors. Upgraded Arthedain Spearmen. I mean, it's not a comprehensive defence out here. I'd imagine this is only designed to do a bit of damage and then to retreat pretty quickly. Hearthguard of Amon Sul, a far more defensive unit than the Gatekeepers, but very, very tanky. Spears in melee as well, so good for staying alive for a long period of time, as we learned recently when we've seen Cardolan. Some Cardolan Dunedain Rangers, 2 units of them, again plenty of damage. In terms of ranger amounts, there's certainly going to be more for the defenders today than for the attackers as we make our way through the cliff. We've got plenty of Cardolan Men-at-Arms, again like we mentioned with stuff like the Serpent Guard. The Cardolan Men-at-Arms, big shields, armour, solid defensively, not necessarily the most damaging unit, but then rank and file sword and shield units from the Kingdoms of Men rarely are the most damaging units, but dependable on the front line. Morale, is that going to be an issue for defenders as long as they keep their ducks in a row? It shouldn't be. It should be more of a problem for the attackers today, with some of their armies in particular, but there's always something you do need to consider with Cardolan. Arthedain Spears, and we've also got some more Arthedain Pikemen in there as well. Got the Tharbad Tollkeepers, a basic unit of, that's going to be an issue, making our way to the gates. But yeah, Tharbad Tollkeepers, more Dunedain Rangers. Tharbad Tollkeepers are good defensively, but very weak offensively. But again, they're more designed to be the front line, and the skirmishers are going to be the thing which win or lose the battle for the defenders here. More Men-at-Arms, got the Defenders of Fornost, a potentially very useful unit. They're going to be better at fighting the Elves, but they're also going to do plenty of damage to the evil men and orcs. Our first instance of some dwarves of the Blue Mountains under the Flame of Arnor's command, so it's warriors of the Blue Mountains. We know how useful basic dwarven units can be in comparison to their peers. We've got the High Thanes of Azagal, who are a really dominant unit, in terms of being well-rounded. The performance they put in is very often very, very strong. Big damage from the javelins, and then very difficult to deal with their halberds in melee. Not too dissimilar to the Gatekeepers, but they do have that second hit point, and their bodyguard tier nature just gives them that real extra boost. The Frost Spears of Azagal could be an incredibly important unit. The Repeaters, they don't do as much damage as crossbows with an individual shot, but far more consistent with the delivery of those shots, and they could be really, really impressive here. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, so more javelins. Got the Wardens of Tirn Gorthad as well, boosting the morale of the nearby allies. 2 units of them, so not surprising to see that. And then the equivalent Arthedainian unit actually as well, very, very similar, are the Anuminous Gate Guards, and in amongst the Greenway Footmen. Stone Hewers, armour piercing for the defenders is going to be most useful against Angmar, but we'll also find a little bit of a niche against Rhun and Lothlorien as well, but obviously more damaging in general regardless. Tharbad Warhammers. There's no armour upgrades for Cardolan's army here. You've got like the teal tabards, and that's it rather than the plate armour, but still. We've got the Cardolan sharpshooters. Again, more crossbows, always going to be helpful. Tharbad tollkeepers, defenders of the Blue Mountains. There is some defensive cavalry. The Durin's Warborn are a through and through unit of shock cavalry, really. Monstrous cavalry with plenty of mass, but yeah, we'll see how well they can be utilised. It'll be interesting to see if they escape early doors, but the Dragon Knights may have something to say about that if they do. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, more Frost Spears, more Stone Hewers, and then the last unit I think we'll be looking at, Cardolan Sharpshooters, and then, oh no, there is some Arthedain cavalry as well, some basic lance as well, Knights of Fornost, far more of a limited shelf life on them than on a bodyguard tier unit of cavalry, of course, but still potentially damaging, as we've seen recently with the Rohirrim cavalry, town centre over here as well, which needs defending, of course. Trollslayers, Wardens of the North, and Juggernauts, some very significant units over here guarding the approach. Nothing, actually, there is also some Marksmen of Thorin's Halls up there on the side. I'm a little bit surprised that all of these hexagons are not occupied by skirmishers already, but there's plenty of time for them to move into position, and this is a long battle after all. And I would imagine there's going to be maybe a little bit of reorganisation early doors here. I mean, 73,000 frames is pretty extreme, but we have seen longer battles in the past, so we'll see how this one goes. I'll rejoin when the battle's about to get underway. So the battle getting underway a little bit sooner than maybe I would have expected, given the extremely long nature of this one. But yes, the crossing of the river, starting off with a bit of Harad, but interestingly enough, mostly the fallen elves of Lothlorien are the ones that are moving forward first and foremost, which is an interesting one. Something else which stands out is the fact that the attackers over on this side are, for one thing, quite far away from crossing the river, but also are not sending over a great deal of units to attempt to move into the settlement directly, and in fact, for now, they're only sending a single unit of pikes over to block any sort of sally out, but in so doing, they're also going to be subject to the damage coming forth from these javelins. Like I said, spread out across a lot of these players by the looks of things. We do have a fair amount of newer players. Obviously this was sent to me by the Flame of Arnor a little while ago now, but quite a few of these are names that we haven't seen before, so there may be a little bit of inexperience going on with several of these players. But having said that, the way that this is set up, the attackers should have a decent margin for error with what they can expect to get away with. Cardolan and Arthedain alongside Ered Luin. It's a pretty potent defensive force. Good mix of ranged support as well as certainly very solid initial units, but the pikes have forced the javelins back inside, but still a little bit of damage has been done. Meanwhile over here, Atomic Bear moving forward. There is the responding fire now from the Elven archers, Lorien archers and Galathrun firing in. And again, this is pretty open. I mean, this does offer a good vantage point to attack from, but it also is a little bit more open to counter skirmishing, but still Lorien don't tend to be the best at this sort of thing. These sky bridges, the Elven sky bridges, do allow you to fire from both directions very easily as well. And the initial front line of Arthedain, Lucky Luke's Arthedain spearmen, being engaged by the basic spears of the Haradrim, but of course this fight initially will certainly go in Arthedain's favour, but if you have a huge column of Elven infantry colliding with these Arthedainians, then that will change around pretty quickly. But the fact that the elves are here, I mean, all of these siege towers being in place does mean that actually the Arthedain arrows will struggle a little bit more to find their marks, because the Dunedain Rangers would be a real concern for the elves here under normal circumstances, but this has worked out reasonably well from that perspective, I suppose. And they can't fire directly down either, so weirdly enough the elves are reasonably well covered here. The question of what they do next is still an interesting one. That initial Harad exploration is not going to end too well without support, but there is a pretty big defensive force out here. Obviously the main thrust of the attack is going to come through this little outer town anyway, so it's not too surprising to see that. Arbiter is another name that we have seen several times before. Sending up just a single unit of crossbows though. Very well prepared defence over here, admittedly mostly through Cardolan's own crossbows for now. Cross spears as well in a nice position to shoot into the backs. I mean, this is a really gnarly defence for the attackers to try and make their way through in terms of that web of skirmishers, which is why I would probably suggest, if I were them, sending a decent force to try and go for the settlement directly. So if they start making decent progress there, they will have to siphon off some of their outer resources here, the defenders. And they are still outnumbered here. Second unit of spears. Thought about tollkeepers being sent in to help marshal things, but that won't be the most important thing for now, given that it is only Haradrim spearmen that are offering a challenge. And the elves, what are they doing now? Where have they all gone for a start? Surely they haven't all fled back across the river. Or have they? A few of them have. A lot of them still in and amongst the siege towers though, going to try and push them up once again. It's all well and good. The tower's still offering a bit of cover to the elves on the approach, but even if they were to add themselves to the front line now, it certainly doesn't come quickly enough to save the Haradrim spearmen that opened proceedings up. Indeed, a bit of a counter-attack could be forthcoming now as well. Although admittedly, Tharbad Tollkeeper's very poor in terms of their initial damage numbers, and even their pretty decent defences are not going to be enough against the kind of Lothlorien forces we're seeing here. Galathrim Axemen. In fairness, shields on the Tharbad Tollkeepers are pretty good. And I don't think the defenders will be too displeased that it's the Tollkeepers taking throwing axe fire when it could have been something else. And again, there's a lot of throwing axes being buried into the side of their own siege tower, so as much as they've done a good job at covering themselves, they're also getting in the way of their own damage now as well. You can see a decent amount of damage done to these Arthedain marksmen from the elven archers that are crossing the river. But again, from an Arthedain perspective, this is the sort of thing that you would be expecting to use this unit for, so I don't think they'll be too displeased again. Barrow Whites from Angmar, I mean, a pretty substantial force coming forward from Rhun now. Eastron crossbows in support, but yeah, that's one of the things. The Frost Spear's in a perfect position to shoot into the backs of these runic units. Crossbow bolts targeting the supporting Greenway footmen. Tharbad Tollkeepers on their own. I mean, even with Frost Spear support, they're still going to lose out to the March of the Flag Rim without support. Decent amount of damage done there. Marksman of Thorin's Hall, so a little bit of crossfire going on between the Frost Spears and the Marksmen. The presence of the Barrow Whites means that this is a attack which is not going to be going anywhere anytime soon either, with 2 units of them. Cardolan sharpshooters in a decent position. This doesn't have the hallmarks of a battle that goes past 70k frames, I must say. Considered opening, but it's not as if they've been totally passive here, the attackers. Crossbow bolts hitting the side, some of them hitting the dirt just in front, but enough hitting to be getting on with for now. And the Flag Rim put under some pretty significant pressure. Crossbow bolts and Frost Spear bullets. Not the sort of thing that you want to be dealing with indefinitely. This unit of Galathrim Axemen a little bit more exposed now, but that's presumably to try and get themselves a better shot with their own throwing axes. Trying to take some chunks out of these spear lines that the defenders have laid on. Another unit from the Haradrim now coming forwards as well. Southron Warband at least do have that armour piercing, but their defensive stats are still very low. Bit of a response to the Dunedain Rangers. Back and forth here. Neither side will be too enamoured with this engagement, but Arthedain's rangers have probably loosed a few more arrows. It's harder to tell whether the arrows have managed to find more marks than not. I mean, having a look at the amount of bodies over here, I mean, there are some corpses, but not a huge amount. So their arrows will have had the same fate as those initial Lorien throwing axes. Adding themselves into melee now, but Dunedain Rangers I'd burrow in, but immediately shaken. This only really works as a mass push if you've got sufficient numbers on the front line, which the attackers don't have at this point. Yeah, one thing that does immediately stand out is the fact that reinforcements are pretty far away. I'm sure the thinking here is to try and avoid the fate of being shot at from these sky bridges with these nasty skirmishes that all three of the defending factions have, but in so doing you could end up completely losing your initial attacks, and any gains you could make could easily then be wiped out by a defending counterattack. Stone Pewers getting involved, a little bit of extra damage. In and amongst the runic units, the damage will also be helpful against the Barrow-wights. Over here, meanwhile, Dragon Knights should be sufficient on their own, really, to marshal any sort of counterattack, and I doubt the defenders would be looking to counterattack out of this gateway into Thranduil's halls proper just yet. They might be tempted to do so if the attackers end up taking a ton of damage on the extremities. Barrow-wights. Extra damage coming in from these strong crossbows. I mean, they have taken a lot of damage over here from counter-skirmishing, as you can see, but this is a situation when you do have the numbers advantage. Any sort of value you can get with a unit like crossbows is going to be very well appreciated by your own troops and your allies. It's not the worst use of them, I'd have to say. And over here, seeing a little bit more now with dismounted Serpent Guard being added to the mix. And this has turned into a little bit more like it now, causing the defensive line to bow inwards a little bit, and those Serpent Guard and the Galathrim Axemen will cause real problems to the Arnorian spears from both petty kingdoms. Sending another unit in, as well as a unit of pikes. The pikes will be wanting to blanket the line a little bit more than they're currently doing, but that will restabilise the front line for now. Guardians just in behind again, a little bit more of a point-blank affair. Poison projectiles, not likely to be too impactful at these early stages, managing to get some hits point-blank into the Dunedain Rangers. Cardolan could be a good choice of target for poison projectiles later on, but I don't know how many of the Lorien archers there will necessarily still be left alive by that point. Here are the Durin's Warborn, who apparently do have an anti-cavalry bonus. I'm sure the last time that I saw them they didn't. At least when I was looking through the stats, but still, a very heavy unit of cavalry. As with Dwarven cavalry tends to be, the mass is very impressive, so their charges tend to be pretty crunching, both the Ered Luin and Erebor variants, but speed can be a bit of an issue for them, but in siege battles like this, that doesn't tend to be the most important thing. More hits coming in. The Barrow-wights, again, pushing them off that initial front line, and that will give them a little bit of cover against those frost spears who were being pretty effective, so the attackers will be wanting to consolidate these gains as they make them. Closing in now. The Greenway Footmen joining with the Tharbad Tollkeepers, spilling around the sides. I like this from Angmar, taking advantage of the fact that there are gaps in the defensive lines. But they do need to consolidate this with more infantry, I think, and the problem is the infantry is still pretty far off. There's some Narim. They are sending forward some Angmar Marauders now, which is better than nothing. But yeah, trying to get the this outer town dealt with as quickly as possible is the way to go, I think, although how likely that is, I don't know. Tollkeepers and Guardians of the Blue Mountains as well. I mean, the upshot here is even if Angmar and Rhun do get a little bit stingy with committing reinforcements forward, the Barrow-wights will last long enough to the point where they do have time to react. But that won't always be the case in this battle. When the Barrow Wights are extended, they will need to have their reinforcements a little bit more on hand than they have thus far. Because the desert moving forward, a little bit bloodied already. Understandably, as soon as you see a unit like this, they're capable of the kind of devastation that you need to be using archers on, albeit the Dunedain Rangers pulling out their axes now, so presumably that's all she wrote from their ammunition, and they will have to muck in melee. Dunedain Troll Slayers represent something which will do damage in the immediate sense even more quickly. Firing a point blank into this location, I mean the Troll Slayers are the sort of thing which the Demons of the Desert will also not be too pleased to see. Yeah, good hits. Again, a bit more aggression is probably what is needed here. Those Guardians of Cardolan are very bloodied and damaged. So presumably when they retreated back across the river, they took a whole load of shots in the back from the Cardolan Rangers and the Arthedain marksmen. If that's the case, then I really don't understand what the thinking of retreating was. You're in a reasonably safe location. Certainly safer than that turned out to be. So the Rangers... Spears now drawn. Can we get into melee as well? I mean, they're a very effective melee combatant after all. But if they can push in over here, the attackers, if they can make a little bit more progress with some more reinforcements, then they could cut off any sort of retreat from the infantry units anyway that Arthedain still have over there. Or at least leave them in need of rescue. Lorien firing up into the Dwarven Archers, Barrow Wights going up against the Stone Hewers. With those hexagonal battle axes of theirs. Peeled off the front line once more. The Angmar Marauders have arrived, already shaken interestingly enough. Some of that entry-level dwarven quality being introduced to the business end of dwarven arrows and Cardolan bolts. Barrow-Wights. It says defeat seems certain, which is a result of several units being engaged with them at once, but their numbers are not yet dwindling too quickly. Another unit of Angmar Marauders, Lorien taking hits again from those frost spears that are up on the high ground. Stone Hewers will be all too happy to see the Angmar Marauders in comparison to the Barrow-Wights. A unit they can get their teeth into much more quickly. Progress being made over here, just squeezing around the edge again. Galathrun warriors getting slightly in behind enemy lines, but they will be met by both flavours of Dunedain here. That likely isn't going to end in too clever a fashion for them either. Galathrun nobles a little bit damaged, but to be fair, I mean, they're not being passive at all here, the attackers. They are putting the front lines under some genuine duress. They will need to keep the flames of this attack stoked, however. That would be my main concern. If these attacks completely fall apart and they have to go from their beginnings once again, that will be pretty tough to do. Lorien still got a bit of ammunition actually, still trying to fire in, but certainly being targeted down pretty effectively. Tollkeepers, in conjunction with those Dwarven Axemen, still doing a good job blocking the further advance of another unit of the Angmar Marauders. Starting to see now as well a bit of routing. The Barrow Wights continue to be marooned really, and the nearest reinforcements pretty far off, and it's just another unit of Angmar Marauders, so it's unlikely to be the sort of thing which turns this battle completely on its head. Marksman of Thorin's Halls taking a bit of damage, to be fair. So the Lorien Haven't gone completely down the tubes, but yeah, trying to use Flaming Shot to rout off some of the basic orcs, and succeeding in doing so. So far a very measured battle by the defenders. Again, further progress over here has stalled a little bit as well. Archers fairly depleted in individual units, but together they're still a reasonably chunky force. Kindred of Celeborn on their way back across the river. Again, there's not a huge amount left in reserve over there at this point, but nor should there be. Slow but sure, but more javelin support coming in now, this time from the dwarves and the guardians of the Blue Mountains, but not the easiest angle, and indeed having to loop their shots very high. They will score some hits, but nothing too devastating as of yet. Still a bit of extra support coming in, and there's no immediate threat of being cut off either. Another unit of Flagrin moving forward, that's a little bit more like it. Alongside the numerous marauders. Spears still firing away. Continuous damage they're capable of doing in this sort of situation we've seen be very effective several times in the past. Rangers, some out of ammunition archers. So, I mean, a fair amount of resources have been used thus far by the defenders, but then most of them in situations where it would have been efficient. Maybe the ones that thudded into the side of the siege towers less so, but for the most part, based on the damage Lorien took when retreating back across the river, having done that, will have more than made up for that, you would suggest. Marksman on the way back in. The elves trying to get some of their own units in position to fire. Galathrim archers, they're very close to the front lines, albeit with the Kindred now arriving, the Trollmen now arriving. This is much more like it, and this is a defence which will now struggle to hold on even with the Troll Slayers at its centre. And out of ammunition archers and rangers will not be enough to make the difference. Again, Rhun have moved in, but they've immediately been surrounded by onrushing reinforcements. Cardolan man-at-arms providing that. More marauders, but again they just find themselves caught on the front line. When the Barrow-wights first moved in, I thought this was a pretty decent first building block to an attack, but I don't think that much is going to come of that initially. Unfortunately for the attackers, they will need to take the slower and more painful approach from here. Still a decent amount of reinforcements to come, however. Still more marauders, crossbows. Not sure what these Dragon Knights are doing. What on earth? Well, I mean, this is an interesting tactic. I mean, to be fair, the enemy will never see it coming. Submariners of the Third Age. Very interesting indeed. Anyway, Durin's Warborn moving forward, that is another problem potentially. If there's no anti-cavalry on the front line, they could just smash directly through it. What is going on here? 177 Angmar Marauders broken. That's another downside to only committing forward low quality units, or mostly low quality. It's the front line. Rarely is that going to work out too well for you. And I'm not really seeing a whole lot from the attackers so far that gives me all that much hope for them. Gatekeepers and Hearthguards still in close support. I mean, pretty decent amount of the defenders are now outside the settlement. Still a decent... well, there's still quite a lot, to be fair, in reserve from both sides of the settlement, so it's certainly not all over, and like I said, the margin for error for the attackers is going to be bigger than it is for the defenders, but it is over here as well where the attackers are having more joy now that they've committed a little bit more to this attack, a little more gumption. Defenders of Fornost trying to stop the elves from slithering past them, but unsuccessful for now. Frost Spears of Azaghal. Bit of Cav as well, the Knights of Fornost, a more basic unit of cavalry. There's still those Barrow-wights backed up against the cliff's edge, doing their best. Defenders of Fornost will move in. It's going to be hard for them to get a charge off for the time being, though. I suppose they could be used as makeshift infantry, but that seems to be a little bit of a waste considering their role as shock cavalry. Well, still the Witchround pikemen loitering with intent. We may see another front open up there at some point once the attackers have made sufficient progress here on the outer layer. I wonder, what fellas have arrived? I mean, again, that arm piercing is all well and good, but as soon as they arrive, they're immediately being peeled off the front line anyway. Scion Rim taking hits in the back. The armour is decent, but the shield's facing the wrong way. That's going to be some pretty gnarly, consistent damage that they take there. Caliborn now using their throwing axes, but throwing them very high. Several of them are hitting, but it's not the kind of devastation they would be hoping for. They're also being engaged in melee while all this is going on. Cairn Amroth Rangers clearly still have some ammunition as well. But they may be pressed into service in melee a little bit sooner than they would have liked. Although perhaps not. Starting to see a little bit of routing now from the defenders as well, which should allow this section of the line, Harad, to spill through. There we have it. Arthedain marksman pinging away. Good hits indeed. Also got the Dragon Knights now. I mean, they might manage to make it through somewhere. I guess they went around. Yes, you can go around. Formations don't extend to the red line of the map, so that explains why they're over here at the very least, which should just twist the knife in terms of morale breaking just that little bit more. Only 4 Demons of the Desert remain, but they can get some point-blank volleys into the defenders of Fornost, so that's a sign again that the defenders have done a good job at targeting down a high-value target. Starting to make some progress over here as well, more reinforcements. I think that comes about more so perhaps as a result of the defenders not committing more reinforcements in, seeing maybe the writing on the wall over on the other side. It doesn't really make sense to commit a great deal into holding on over here either. But this will be encouraging scenes for the attackers. Another unit of stone hewers just trying to make things solidified for now. Durin's Warborn with a point-blank charge. Victory seeming certain for Cardolan still. And I mean, still those Frost Spears, it's not the easiest shot, and some of them are sailing over, but still managing to get the occasional ping onto some of these Eastron crossbows. Marksman firing pretty close by. They haven't got the slight terrain advantage and a bit of crossfire onto the Eastron crossbows. Committing more units in there. Warriors of the Blue Mountains. Also a very significant unit to commit in, considering the situation's looking a little bit ropey perhaps to the High Thanes. And that is almost certainly why those Eastron crossbows are firing at them as well. Numerous examples of how devastating a unit this can be, but yeah, I'd suggest probably moving them back, because this is not a situation you really want to be in. Even those Demons of the Desert. Only 2 of them left now. You can see with just 1 javelin they knock over a great deal of units, but in terms of kills, nothing to speak of. The elves certainly being aggressive with their archers, which is a good thing, I think. Throughout this entire battle they've not been too passive, which is good. Poison projectiles still being utilised as well. Still the occasional bit of resistance being put up by the defenders of Fornost over here. The roundhouse kick, and then skewered while he's on the floor. Dragon Knights managing to get in the way of the defenders of Fornost, as they would have easily dealt with the remaining 2 Demons of the Desert. But yeah, we do have a bit of a counter-attack here. Again, I'm very confused as to how this battle is so long, because both sides have been pretty damn aggressive at this point. Reinforcements may be a little bit further away from the main body of the attacking armies than would be ideal, but nothing that would add vast amounts of time to the battle, I wouldn't have thought. Trollman, Champions of Nafarat now moving forward. There's 1 unit of Serpent Guard still in reserve, but that will mark everything committed by Lorien and Harad over on this side of the battlefield. More arrows being loosed in. Kindred of Caliborn have done a good job in melee ever since they arrived, as you would expect. Greenway Footman. Cardolan Manatars being committed forward alongside the Dwarves once again to assist in actually pushing back against the attackers over here. Once again, regular Angmar Marauders not really cutting the mustard. Dunedain Rangers. Normally I wouldn't recommend using fire arrows on a unit of rangers, because you want to get as many volleys off more so than anything else, but we've already seen a good amount of success in routing off the low-end orc units. Equalising those numbers is one of the more important tasks they can perform. Slayers are there. There are the Warns of the North. Those black trails singling them out. Yeah, the 2nd unit of Demons of the Desert has now moved forward, but immediately once again being targeted down. Being seen for the threats that they are. They'll want to get back behind cover. Pretty sharpish. Defenders of Fornost alongside some of these dwarven units. I mean, marksmen that are out of ammunition, that's all well and good. Javelins moving forward, but they do need a bit more, I think, in melee. You can see here some marksmen of Thorin's Halls pushing all their way through some of these elven units in the backfield. Defeat seems certain for that Harad party that managed to push their way to this point. So a pretty decent return here. Meanwhile, having a look, there's still the Witch-Realm Pikemen. That 1 unit of Witch-Realm Pikemen, eventually, this was always something that was likely to happen as long as only 1 unit remained over here at this gate, especially when it wasn't pointing the right way. A bit of a counter-attack to mob and destroy an isolated unit pretty quickly. Warhammers as a part of that as well. The unit of these pikes moving forward, but that won't be enough to save their brethren. If anything, they'll just be joining them in the grave pretty quickly if they decide to take this fight. Pikes like this can be very good at bogging the enemy down in a bit of a melee tar pit, but that only is truly the case when they've got a bit of support. As we've seen recently, like a bodyguard unit can straight up fight through a pike block. But they are actually pulling back. Some of those beleaguered pikes will be saved, weirdly enough. Neither side following through there. 2-9 Rangers. Starting to see some more serious units from Angmar. Rhun sending some Gamp Rhun forward potentially as well. Yeah, so far, I mean, if the defenders do go on to win this, I think the moral of the story from an attacking perspective is there were several moments really where they could have poured through the defences and overrun them, but the reinforcements were too far away and they weren't quick enough on the draw. It's been the downfall of many an attack in the past, and it could prove to be the same here. Arthedain marksmen hoping to do their bit in melee. Beast hunters surely getting into place to fire away. There's only 3 Galathran nobles. That's been a bit of a theme of the battle as well, seeing the occasional attacker bodyguard unit with only a handful of units left available to them, having to balloon their javelins over their own units, raining down upon the enemy with not much effect. Warriors of the Blue Mountains fleeing. The Caliborn still slowly picking their way through this unit of defenders of Fornost. Trollmen now marching forwards. That's the thing when when you're outnumbered by 1 or 2 armies as the defenders, the attackers can always seem to just pull more infantry units out. And a fresh unit of infantry gets more and more difficult to deal with as the battle goes on. Speaking of which, these dismounted Serpent Guard routing off the remaining marksmen that were committed forwards. Warriors will be acting as a little bit of a rear guard because I think so far they'd want to hold on to this position over here because it's been a very fertile hunting ground for the defenders over on this side, being able to shoot into the backs of these units more effectively. It's not something you can do quite so easily on the other side. They do still have the angle to do it with these over here, but it's not quite as appealing as it is on that side. Again, the Demons of the Desert out in front, tempting their fates. I mean, they will fire point blank and cause a bit of devastation. A lot of those units will get back up, of course, but it will interrupt their advance, and there will still be kills in and amongst all of that disruption. Still got enough units out here to the point where they can mount yet another spirited defence, mind you. The Trolls may change that though. Monstrous infantry capable of doing a lot of damage pretty quickly, and there's not a huge amount of damaging infantry now. There's still a few stone hewers on the front line, but for the most part we've got Cardolan men-at-arms, we've got Warriors of the Blue Mountains, functional units, spears and pikes. The Troll Slayers would be pretty good against them in melee, fittingly enough, as would the Wardens of the North, but definitely want to be utilising the steel bows to their fullest before you get them to draw their longswords. Champions of Nafarat moving forwards, Arthedain spearmen trying to break up this attack, but surely they will end up routing in short order. Effectively behind enemy lines at this point, and yeah, routing off Trollman, Champions of Nafarat, and the Trolls of Angmar, so this now is a heavy-duty assault indeed. From a defending perspective, though, it does give you the opportunity to maybe do a decent amount of damage as the attackers scramble forwards. Looping those armor-piercing shots over. goes the Dwarven General. It's a nice little victory for the attackers there. Again, the Dwarves are on the defence, they do have a town centre, and they themselves have got good morale, generally speaking, so it's certainly not the be-all or end-all like it could be with a force like Cardolan, but you definitely take it as a sign that you're trending in the right direction. And yeah, pikes and spears, no match for the trolls, and now really nasty looking attack, and yeah, a full retreat. Getting everything they can back inside. Those frost spears may end up getting left behind there, considering how quickly the defenders are being forced to pack up and leave. What's going on over in the other entrance? So still the pikes content to just hold their ground. There are still some units out here. So there's a unit of Narim running around. There's some runic units out here in the backfield, including Dragon's Wrath crossbows, but certainly not a full army that would be typically capable of moving through a location like that. Frost spears, I mean, they did manage to get off the sky bridges at least. The Rangers look like they're out of ammunition, so they will probably be more likely to be left behind, but the frost spears getting nibbled at by the champions of Nafarat as well. Things unlikely to end too well for them. Eastron crossbows with a blank shot, but their presence will at least surely prevent any sort of counter-attack, albeit these warriors in the Blue Mountains, they're shaken, but they've managed to wriggle free, and they will get into melee against the crossbows. And small little victories like this can add up in the long run. But yeah, surely they're going to rout. Yeah, they rout now. Champions of Neferat surrounding them. And then the small matter of these Dunedain Rangers being finished off by the trolls. I mean, they do wield those axes, so they will deal a little bit more damage in response to the trolls than some other units might. But ultimately this is still not going to end well for them, especially not with a little bit of extra support coming in from the Harad. Demons, champions, runic units, the upgraded trolls of Angmar, so a decent little force they've got left. Witches, ever the great equaliser in situations like this. Elven units scattered back along the path they took. Evidence that this was a bit of a scrambled affair for sure. More runic units now crossing over here, so it looks as though they are going to completely attack from this side. Keep an eye on the minimap over here, but for now this is a situation where we will actually go up to ×6 speed. Which this may indicate why the battle is a little bit longer. A distinct intermission between the battle for the outer part of the settlement and the inner one. Aha. So we do have an engagement over here. Again, a counter-attack outside the settlement. They realised that not much else was going to be committed over here, so the pikes were engaged. But the Sapphire Bladesmen are over here as well, so it won't be a cakewalk by any means. How about Warhammers? I mean, they wouldn't be the most efficient kind of unit to use against the Sapphire Blades, but needs must in a situation like this. More reinforcements on the way, High Thanes as well, and yeah, the Sapphire Bladesmen. I was going to say, there's only so much in the way of reinforcements that you have out here. I mean, I'm surprised the Dragon Knights weren't over here, to be fair. Drawing the enemy out into the open field and then slamming into them with those lances and cataphracts is one way that you can make the losses sustained over here worthwhile, and to be fair, that is going to be the case by the looks of... that was more of a bump than a charge, which is a shame because the Tharbad Warhammers were there. If that charge had connected, if the target had been set, that could have been a very nice bit of value that Rhun were able to pick up there. Gamprim on the way back across. Again, my thinking now though is that if you don't intend to attack fully through this way, then there's not really a great deal of point in mustering your forces out here. Sapphire Bladesmen firing into those defenders of Fornost, and I mean, the Dragon Knights will make quick work of them in melee as well. Dedicated and relatively fragile lancers against one of the tankier units of knights that the game has to offer. As they flee into the open field, but they are at least pulling away the Dragon Knights for the time being. Unit of depleted Guardians of Cardolan, presumably returning from routing. Champions of Nafarat heading over here too, which is an interesting one. All the siege towers perched on the hilltops nearby. Yeah, for now it's just a case of trying to hunt down this one unit of the Knights of Fornost, which should be able to get away from the Dragon Knights. The Dragon Knights are not the quickest unit of cav in the game, so as long as they take an appropriate pathway through, they should be okay. Going to go right around to the other side of the map as well. And be left alone for the time being. Means we go back to ×6 speed. To be fair, it's been quite a while since we've seen a replay that's got such a distinct midpoint in the battle where there's a fight for an outer section and then a fight for an inner section. Lorien smashing down the outer gates of Thranduil's halls over here. This is definitely where the primary threat is going to be, of course. Off. Do immediately spill out to go after the Lorien. Defenders of the Blue Mountains backed up by Cardolan men-at-arms, which is fair enough. Officers left behind and some of the archers as well. Nothing too impactful for now. Are they going to move forwards again? I was going to say, there's no need for them to go that far into a counter-attack, but just having a look at what the defenders have left, I mean, the issue that the attackers will have is that moving into here, this is a pretty defensible position. You can see that they do have archers set up in the appropriate locations as well. The town centre isn't too far away from this gate over here, however, so they do need to hold on to this part of the fortress. Unlike the old Thranduil's halls, immediately in through the gate actually isn't maybe the most dangerous position for the attackers to be. It's a little bit further back than that, and also based on the way the camera works, I hope that that is where the battle ultimately ends up taking place. This gate actually closed now that the defenders have moved back from it a little bit, but easily remedied. You can see the visual glitch of the gate flashing back and forth between the generic Medieval 2-1 and the asset that was selected for Thranduil's halls proper. Again, they pull back from the gate. But now, we do have the reignition of hostilities over here. And this is as close as we're going to be able to get because of the geometry of the map. But But yes, the Numinous Gate Guards. I think again that this is more of a ×2 situation. Because I don't know how prolonged this is going to be. I'd imagine the attackers are going to try and take nibble by nibble out of the defensive ranks at this point. Yeah, Cardolan Men-at-Arms backing up the Arthedain pikes. Relatively comfortable for the moment, given the small amount of Easterlings that have been committed forth. Surely they're going to rout as well, as victory is almost a certainty, which is certainly not true. They're a little confused, but they got the spirit. They're going to be forced back. Troll Slayers, Juggernauts in good condition, High Thanes. All the sorts of units that you want to see. Don't know how much they've got in the way of crossbow bolt ammunition now, because a decent amount of that was used earlier on. Trolls probably should have been committed sooner, given the fact that the Numinous Gate Guards were the centrepiece of that particular defence. Is there an attack coming in through here as well? There is, and once again I think if it's taking place near the walls, no, this one's a little bit more forgiving. So yeah, Cardolan Men-at-Arms, Sapphire Bladesmen though, so this isn't going to end too well, even with the Tharbad Warhammers. This is probably going to be something which ticks over in favour of the attackers ultimately, albeit there's quite a lot of dead Gamp Rim there. Close by, Guardians of the Blue Mountains, the most likely culprits. It's another unit of the Defenders of, or the Knights of Fornos I should say. The one outside the map having been hunted down while we were watching the gate get battered down. I won't be too pleased about losing the Tharbad Warhammers, I suppose, but surely they're not going to commit in the Wardens of the North in kamikaze fashion as well. Setting up a new front line where you can get a bit of a crossfire going is the way to go, but no, they're just going to commit the unit right in. Interesting choice. I mean, it will offer more of a challenge, I suppose, and pike back up. 1 to Tir Gorthad, maybe this is fine. The Champions of Neferat will be a unit that extract their dues. And over here, Trolls, were they all killed? There's only one left standing by the looks of things. Again, it's kind of frustrating that we can't get closer to the engagement, to be honest. Troll Slayers will have played their part perhaps with the javelins flung in, pikes being retreated to a more manageable location for the camera, certainly. So I'm grateful for that. And further down, and the Warns of the North going back into melee, and again the Balkoth Sapphire Bladesmen being retreated from melee. Are the Guardians of Cardolan. I mean, it's all well and good to do this when you're the attackers, but we've seen quite a lot of examples of the attackers pulling themselves off of engagements, which the damage that you take on the retreat in those situations can be pretty gnarly. Defeat seems certain. Thanes being committed in as well. High Thanes alongside Wards of Tir Gorthad should be enough to turn this fight into the defenders' favour, and again they have to pull themselves off the line. I don't know if they're going to have the angle to be able to throw any remaining javelins in, and even with the Champions of Neferat here, this is going to be a task too much to deal with. What the Sapphire Bladesmen want to be able to do is to use remaining ammunition, but I don't think they're going to be given the opportunity to do so. As we find ourselves stuck in the ceiling once again. Again, this attack is going to end in failure by the looks of things. Few Easterlings do remain, but not for too much longer. Again, when you start to see a bit of a broken field situation like this, you do worry for the attackers, because there's only so many times that the game will allow them to do this based on the manpower they have remaining. Weird situation though, where the Horns of the North are actually on the outside of the engagement now, and Champions of Nafrat on the inside. Fighting relatively evenly with one another for now, but I think the Champions will come out on top. They've got slightly more numbers, slightly more support as well, and have been in open combat for the least amount of time, and certainly with the Sapphire Bladesmen coming in, that will be the end of Arthedain's finest. There goes their general. With that, Guardians of the Blue Mountains, again, only popping out from around the corner when their allies are already dead. This has been a confusing battle in terms of when people have done certain things, the decision making that has been prevalent. Dragon Knights are there, but I mean, they won't want to get involved with the High Thanes whatsoever. Certainly not with the Wardens of Tir Gorthag. Pikes evaporate cavalry and melee, and they are going to move in. That isn't going to end too well for them if they remain for any length of time. If they get the Guardians of the Blue Mountains, that's fine. There are more units over here as well. So Muhard Beast Hunters going to try and use their javelins, presumably on the High Thanes, indeed. Some decent hits there. Out come the Knights of Fornost again. Both sides have been weirdly aggressive in moments of the battle where I wouldn't necessarily have expected it. That was certainly the Haradrim general. Champions of Nafrat being left to fend for themselves against the Pikes. Harad's morale is the sort of thing which can have a big impact as well on them. Again, what have we got going on over here? So we've got Dragon Knights, Witches on the way across here now as well, individual units being sent back across, but we've seen this recently where it's almost like players have changed their mind with regards to what position they want to attack the location from, and as a result they end up taking an awful lot of time repositioning infantry units. Knights of Fornost will want to get away from the Beast Hunters pretty quickly because they are spears in melee. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, swords in hand. They won't do too well against the Dragon Knights, you would suggest. Knights of Fornost. In the Durin's Warboard, as we've already mentioned, are a particularly devastating force off the charge. Javelins able to do their thing, but going right down, and also along the length of the unit, the Knights of Fornost also getting involved, so that's going to be a devastating blow, and then also a bit of an infantry engagement to finish that up with. So a surgical removal, really, of a unit from the battlefield there. Very nicely done. But the Dragon Knights are still a threat, still going to be very much doing their thing, and the Knights of Fornost are the ones to pay the price for that. I mean, surely the target to go after is the Witches here. Set up like bowling pins for the Durin's Warborn. One charge will be all it takes as well. They're already a little bloodied from archers. Yeah, there they go. And that is, I think, the entirety of that unit destroyed. 3 remain. Only 3. I mean, the trolls were meant to be their cover, but they were sticking out far enough for the Durin's Warborn to land that hefty charge. And if the defenders can get rid of those, that's obviously, as we mentioned before, the great equaliser in this situation. Even if the defenders build up a decent enough lead for themselves. Witches can be a way back in, but maybe not with the level of DPS that they would otherwise have. Having a look over here, I mean, having a look at what the attackers have left. It's looking a little bit scattered. They've got a fair amount of units left over here, but quite a lot of them are ultimately... What are they doing? I don't know what they think they're firing at, but taking pot shots nonetheless. And then all quiet in here once more. Durin's Warborn charging into the Dragon Knights, going toe to toe with one another. Dragon Knights getting the better of it now, though. The Warboars have certainly proven their worth thus far, though. They retreat back inside the settlement. The Dragon Knights, again, showcasing their superior speed. Again, I did mention they're not the fastest unit of cav, but the heavy dwarven cavalry is very often the slowest, albeit they have been coaxed into the Wardens of Tirngulta, so Rhun will lose a few riders of their own. Which again, brings us back to the point where the attack has fizzled out once more. And we wait for it to recommence. There go the Warboars again. Albeit I think they just got mobbed, didn't they? Certainly something was... Yeah, there's no way they were going to easily be able to manage to get through there. Cardolan. The Narim with that effect of theirs that sets fire to outer fortifications, which can always look quite striking. Purely cosmetic when it hits buildings, however. Able to deal with a bit of a sally forth there. Yeah, I think based on the quality that they have left, I don't really know what options the attackers have left to them from here. We are effectively within the final stages of the battle where they try and do some damage from afar.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Now we're going to get some point-blank hits here. In dire need of some value, and there go the Trollman. Try to get unstuck from the ceiling. Guardians of the Blue Mountains blocking the Trollmen's continued progress. In come the Pikes once more, who have been very effective at marshalling the outer gates of Thranduil's halls during every attempt to move forward. Javelins from the Troll Slayers, I mean, certainly as you would expect from a siege battle like this, but maybe even more so than is typical. The defenders' supporting units have been far more devastating than those of the attackers. Behind enemy lines as well. Make a nuisance of themselves. The classic announcer problem. Yeah, and another attack has been thrown off. I mean, this has happened far too many times at this point, surely, for the attackers to stand a continued chance in this fight. The Trolls. Again, just caught in the ceiling. We'll just have to content ourselves with this current camera position. Occasional arrow flying overhead. Serpent Guard on the way in, a little bit more serious, but you can see the Trolls are just falling away far too quickly, and that'll be a result of the Troll Slayers. High Thanes will have had their part to play in that as well. The Witchers trying to turn things around, but the DPS they have available to them at this point is probably not sufficient, although that was a very good hit. Decent damage being done, but they are at a significant deficit, certainly in terms of quality, you would say. quite the one-shot, one-kill situation we normally see with the Witchers, but they managed to pretty much use up all of their ammunition there and use it up effectively. Again, another good hit. I mean, to be fair, across several hits of... I think there was only one projectile thrower at that point. Still as devastating as ever. It's as if he's just reaffirming that to himself. Just making sure that nothing has yet changed. They've got the Dragon Knights into the settlement, but... what else? Eastron crossbows. So Rhun do have a presence in here now. Make it count. I mean, the problem with this sort of settlement in particular is it's very hard to use cavalry when there's only really one ring road around the whole of the interior, so it's not as if you can disguise where they're going. And when you've got stuff like the High Thanes still operational, it's going to be a very tough thing. Dunedain Rangers firing away. Yeah, and that's surely not going to end well. Yeah, I can understand what they were thinking. Like they're caught on both sides. Basically, there's going to be High Thanes over there, Pikes over here. At this point, it's sort of desperation settings. Harad moving back inside. Still Juggernauts idle. Frost Spears, Hearthguard still pinging away. I mean, the defenders don't have a limitless amount of units left. The quality of what they do have left is probably going to be too much. Juggernauts shimmying their way forwards. Oh, those Eastron crossbows from behind, but again, this is a ×6 kind of situation. We are into the final 10k frames, though much of this is going to be fast-forwarded, I would suggest. ×2 at the very least. Troll Slayers and Gate Guards dealing with what remains of the Muhard tribes. That's pretty much that, isn't it? I think presumably the elf player disconnected at some point, because these guys have just been stood out here for ages. I mean, to be fair, it's not it wouldn't have made a difference to the frontal push, let's put it that way. Even though there are Kindred of Caliborn and such here, it's a very scattered selection of units, and many of them lightly armoured, so they would have been among the first to perish at the hands of what the defenders were doing. The crossbows. I mean, I guess ironically enough, Lothlorien will be the last of the attackers left standing. Yeah, a little bit of a broken battle this. Still has some of those classic lessons that attackers need to heed in this sort of situation. Numbers advantage alone is not a guarantee of success, but perhaps not my favourite battle. We'll be kind and put it that way. This one started off promisingly enough, though. The outer reaches were pretty good, but that's why I'm always a little bit leery of when I see a battle that is quite this long in terms of frames. Because very often there is, to be blunt, something wrong with it. And on this occasion it wasn't too egregious, because like I said, it didn't really affect the outcome, but still. We move. Certainly ×6 is the way to go about things here, because it just depends on when they get their units out here to try and deal with Lorien. Gate Guards slowly shimmying forwards against these depleted units. The Juggernauts up against the Kindred of Caliborn. Two dual-wielding Titans. Kindred already slightly battered up from their previous encounters. The Juggernauts fresh. Troll Slayers once again having an impressive fight. Galathrim nobles. Finally, the calls of Arthedain are going to be silenced, at least eventually. Maybe when a little bit of support comes in, at least. Those pikes will take a long time to do it otherwise. Then Juggernauts. Just having a look at the kill counts. I mean, yeah, it is close. As much as it was a very weird fight to behold and did include a player disconnecting towards the tail end, it was a close run thing. But certainly I think the defenders are worthy victors. Also, what would the percentages have been if those witches hadn't been able to claw back a bit of value in the main gatehouse towards the tail end as well? You have to wonder. Spears pushing into what remains in behind here. Lorien archers carrying Amroth rangers, a couple of units of which. Gateguards being left to their own devices against the Galathrim nobles. I'm sure words will be said at the victory banquet after the fact about that. Arthedain still in there as well, who have taken a bit of damage over the course of the battle as well. As domineering as they are, Galathrim nobles finishing off the gate guards. They're pushing their way through down here. For what purpose? What are they doing? They're spreading themselves out across the field, whatever they're doing. Karen Amroth Rangers. Yeah, Arthedain's turning around to deal with that situation. They're going to rout the Karen Amroth Rangers, and that will be how the battle ends. And there we have it. So yeah, this, for context, is the last one that I'm recording before I will actually be heading home for Christmas in like an hour and a half's time. So as much as this is well within the new year in January, this wasn't recorded as such, so this is just me trying to build up as much of a stockpile, because I don't know when I'm going to be coming back up here to be able to record once again. It will definitely be up by this point, but I wanted to just future-proof a little bit. And this is a replay that I was sent quite some time ago by Flame of Arnor as well. Obviously newer maps, and also maps that are more themed than this one tend to take precedence. That's just how it is. But I did want to show maybe a set-piece map as well. A little bit of an odd one, like I said. But yeah, it's fine. It is what it is. And obviously from this point onwards I will have a little bit more of a considered approach towards what replays I'm doing and in what order, because I will be back at my PC and able to record in a slightly more structured manner, shall we say. But yeah, this is an attempt to at least start cleaning out that backlog of maps and other such things that we've seen before. Like there's one replay from Thanatos which I've had since before I started my hiatus of 2025, when I was like moving house and job, which he's constantly been asking me to do, basically intermittently every couple of months. So I should get on to doing that one within the next couple of weeks, I would hope, once I'm back. It does still have the same problem as this one, perhaps, where the theme is not really that unified, and it is on a map we've ultimately seen before, and it is quite a long replay as well. But that is one that I do want to do, because obviously it has been pointed out to me several times at this point. And there's a few others as well, like there's a return of a map that we've seen a lot in the past, but not recently, and it's also a bit of a classic in Tol Falas. And stuff like that, you know. There's also one that's on Pelagia, I think, like the old version of Pelagia, which was always a bit of a technical disaster, really, although that has changed in recent times. But yeah, plenty of stuff like that. But we are sort of, at least at the time of recording this, I had done all of the scenario / series / new map replays that I've been given. The last new map, new in quotation marks, was the one before this, sent to me by Medexa. So yeah, at the very least that is the case, and we'll see what goes on, because there is a few rumblings of a few people maybe returning to the fold after a little bit of a hiatus of their own at the start of 2026. So hopefully if I can get involved with some of the things that they're doing as well, we can steer things in maybe a bit more of a structured direction in terms of getting some stuff with themes, you know, new maps, that sort of thing. Because that's what I want to do in 2026. I do want to sort of improve things rather than just sort of, again, act on survival mode as I was in 2025, as I alluded to in the channel update that I did just before Christmas Day. But yeah, again, that's the sort of thing which I've gone through before, and maybe some further clarification on that could be done in its own video, perhaps, combined with a bit of content. But again, I'm thinking out loud here, because, like I said, by the time this is all happening, it'll be 3 weeks into the future at least. And, you know, I don't want to be making decisions on behalf of the future me from 3 weeks' time. So, yeah, anyway, enough of my rambling. Big thank you to the Flame of Arnor, though, so let's see what did the damage for his army. Marksman of Thorin's Hall is very good. Frost Spears is exactly the sort of battle that you'd expect them to be effective in. Over 300 kills on the Stone Hewers, which is not bad. Many of them would have been on Angmar Marauders, but it's still a good return from a unit like that. Durin's Warborn were effective in the moments they were used, obviously bowling over many of those Witches, which proved to be maybe less of a factor in the long run than maybe it could have been, but still. And yeah, pretty good performances all round, maybe less so from some of the high-end units like the Juggernauts, but they were only committed very late on. Like all of those kills would have been against Kindred of Caliborn. So yeah, there it is. So big thank you to the Flame of Arnor. Big thanks to all the other players as well that were a part of this battle replay. Many names that I've not seen before or since. So yeah, apologies for the delay on maybe showing the map that you were in, but obviously all of those factors that I've mentioned several times before always come into it. You know, new map, new scenario, new content of any sort, and a theme. All of those things push something further up the list than something like this, for example. Even though there was the very loose theme of Lorien turning evil and leading the remnants of Sauron's minions against the forces that had moved into Thranduil's now abandoned halls. Again, it's a it's a stretch, but it's something at least. It's better than some of the examples of me trying to do this in the past. But at least we got to see the map again, which this is a fantastic. Well, Thranduil's halls as it is now, it's a fantastic map, I think. As is all of the capital set pieces are really, really good. So yeah, we can thank WK as well for that, I suppose. But yeah, anyway, enough of this, enough of my rambling. I need to pack the remainder of my stuff so I can go and leave for the holidays. And by the time this is seen, of course, that will all be over. So I hope we all had a good time and we can move from here. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.